essentially a procedure where the conviction will stand, but the soon-to-be president will not have any jail time.
In the last few minutes, President-elect Donald Trump has just been given an unconditional discharge at his criminal hush money sentencing in New York. He's appearing in court virtually as we speak. Trump was found guilty of falsifying records to disguise a six-figure payment to the adult film actress Stormy Daniels last year, and he had asked the Supreme Court to halt the sentencing. However, in a decision which was 5-4, the court ruled yesterday that it could go ahead. Let's now speak with Sarah Krissoe, who's a former federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York. Sarah, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So just explain, what is an unconditional discharge and what will this mean for Donald Trump?
So it is essentially a procedure where the conviction will stand, but the soon-to-be president will not have any jail time. There will be no supervision by the court, no probation or other type of supervision by the court, and no financial penalties. So sort of no additional penalties to the president other than the fact of the conviction itself.
So it's the conviction, and it just means he officially has a conviction, but there's no kind of sentence as it was. There's no kind of punishment. I mean, does that often happen in the law? I mean, is there any point in giving him a conviction if there's no punishment?
So it is a tool that is built into the New York Penal Code. It is something that happens. It usually happens in cases where the offense is pretty minor, or there is just extreme mitigating circumstances, and the judge determines that the conviction itself is enough punishment. And listen, there are repercussions of having a felony conviction. It can strip you of valuable civil rights. You're not allowed to have a firearm in the United States. They could prevent you from travel if you certain licensings. If you're a physician, right, or a pharmacist or something along those lines, the conviction could prevent you from doing that work. But obviously, we've seen that the conviction does not prevent you from being president of the United States.
And he will, of course, it won't have any impact on the inauguration, but he will be legally the first president to have a criminal record. Will that matter to him, or could he decide to pardon himself when he returns to office and sort of get rid of it?
So he doesn't have pardon power over this crime because it is a state crime. So he cannot pardon himself for this. The governor of New York would have to do that. But the soon-to-be president continues to rail against this case. He spoke out this morning during the sentencing proceeding how he thinks the case was unfair and unjust and biased against him. And I'm certain that he intends to appeal it through the legal channels, through the courts, and I expect those appeals could last years.
And just a final question to you, Sarah. What's happened with some of the other cases that he's involved in? Have they all sort of gone away now, or are they sort of just kicked into the long grass as he's begun to become president?
So, I think we can safely assume that everything is going away or has gone away. So the two federal cases are basically done. Those will have been dismissed against him. The Department of Justice has decided not to proceed with those, given their policy not to proceed against cases involving sitting presidents. And then there is the Georgia case, which seems to be on its last legs. There was, a really extensive litigation there regarding the relationship between the district attorney and one of her lead prosecutors, and that has really derailed that case. And that case is really, I think there's zero chance of that case going forward either.
So they've pretty much gone away. Listen, Sarah, thanks very much for your time. Very interesting to speak with you. That's Sarah Krissoe, a former federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York.
Donald Trump has been spared jail and even a fine over his hush money conviction. This afternoon, the soon-to-be US president has been given an unconditional discharge by a judge in New York. Alistair Dorber is Washington correspondent for The Times and The Sunday Times. Alistair, good afternoon.
Hi, Kathy.
Remind us first of the backdrop to this case, the facts of the case.
Well, Donald Trump was convicted in May of essentially business malpractice and hiding hush money payments made to a porn star, Stormy Daniels, who alleged that she'd had an affair with Donald Trump way back in 2006. The payments were made in 2016 ahead of the presidential election, ostensibly to keep them out of the public domain, hush money payments, so that news of the affair wouldn't break before the election, which Donald Trump feared might jeopardize his chances of winning. Of course, as it turned out, he did win that election. The charges followed of a business malpractice, and in May last year, he was convicted, became the first person ever to be president to be convicted of 34 felony charges, and today we've seen the sentencing for that.
And what has been Trump's reaction to the fact that he doesn't have either a jail sentence or, any kind of fine?
Well, Donald Trump was joined the hearing today by video link from Florida. He already knew that he wasn't going to get a custodial sentence, that he wasn't going to be fined. He said that it was an outrage of justice and that he would definitely appeal. The truth is really that this is the best outcome for Donald Trump. 12 months ago, we were looking at 4 cases he was facing, all of which could have carried substantial prison time. And I remember speaking to a guy earlier this year, a professor of law in California, and he said, look, Donald Trump is going to go to one of 2 places after November. It'll either be the White House or it'll be to a prison cell. It's clearly the White House. He goes back to the White House in 10 days' time. 2 of the other cases have collapsed against him. The other one is a shambles, and in this case, he's got effectively what I think we can term as a slap on the wrist.
Yeah. Trump's lawyer said the majority of the American people say the case should never have been brought. Is there any truth to that?
Well, that's something, you can argue he would say that, wouldn't he? What we do know is that this case was heard over 6 weeks last summer. A jury convicted Donald Trump. It made Donald Trump the first person ever to serve in the White House to become a convicted felon. And yet, fast forward to November last year, and Donald Trump, by some margin, quite comfortably won the presidential election. Whether or not people believed it should have been the case should have ever gone to court is a moot point. The fact is they don't really care about the outcome.
What's the sort of political ramifications of this, do you think? And also legal, because has there been any sort of renewed debate over the integrity of the US legal system?
Well, there was a case in the Supreme Court last year that decided that presidents should have sweeping immunity for actions carried out as president. Now, Donald Trump has used that, and it's led to the collapse of 2 federal cases against him. People have been jailed over this matter. Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, admitted making these payments, facilitating these payments to Stormy Daniels, and he went to prison. It does feel that Donald Trump has perhaps benefited from the fact that he won the election. His supporters might say, well, that's a good thing. You can't have someone in the White House also having the threat of a prison sentence hanging over them. Will people think it's fair? That's for them to judge themselves. Donald Trump will arrive in the White House a week on Monday in just 10 days' time as a convicted felon with a conviction on his record.
Does he and his lawyer have a point, though, when they talk about the politicisation of the US legal system? Is there an ounce of truth, or even more than an ounce in that?
Well, look, this case has gone to a jury. A jury's decided that Donald Trump's guilty. One of the themes running through Donald Trump's defence through all of his criminal cases over the last few years is that the Department of Justice has been weaponised against him, and that it's all part of a political plot to keep him out of the White House. A jury decided that wasn't the case in New York last year. And we'll wait to see what he does with the Department of Justice when he's back in office himself.
Alistair Dorber, thank you very much for joining us. Alistair Dorber is Washington correspondent for The Times and The Sunday Times.